Hey guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg with two videos in one. So we're going to cover both versions of the Moto G, the Google Play Edition, which just came out this week, and the Moto G, which launched in November. Both of these are the same devices, but the Google Play Edition is running stock Android. Now, this may not be such a big deal because the Moto G pretty much ran stock Android. Remember that Motorola is a Google company, and the Moto G had a few features, or has a few features, but otherwise runs the stock Android experience. There isn't a heavy skin over it. So the Google Play Edition of the Moto G joins quite a few other devices, including the GS4, the HTC One, the Sony Z Ultra, the LG G Pad 8.3, and as of course we have the other Nexus devices, including the Nexus 5, the Nexus 10, and the Nexus 7. But this is the cheapest stock Android device you can buy from Google right now at $179. So this gets you in the door. It's quite a value for what you get. Now remember, these are both 3G phones. There is no LTE here. Now it's important to remember that the Google Play Edition is the global GSM version. So it doesn't work with all T-Mobile bands, while the version I have here, the one sold in the US by Motorola, does support all T-Mobile bands. Now T-Mobile will work on this phone, but some bands aren't supported, so keep that in mind. You may want to look at this instead if you're a T-Mobile customer. Now in terms of specs, these are identical. They both have the same 4.5-inch LCD IPS display with 720p resolution, good for 329 pixels per inch. We have the same 1.2 gigahertz Snapdragon 400 processor. We have 1 gig of RAM, and we have a 2070 milliamp hour battery. So we have the same specs, same camera, 5 megapixel rear firing camera, the same hardware design, everything like that. It's just the software is different. All right, so let's go ahead and start unboxing these, starting off with the Motorola Moto G. So as you can see, Motorola, a Google company. Now this comes in this black back panel, but these are swappable, so you can remove these and add your own color. This is different than the Moto X, which you can customize more heavily, so you can customize the front color, so you can either get white or black. For the Moto G, you basically get black and the option to change the back panel. Now you can't change the back panel with the Moto X, you have to pretty much set it in when you customize your order. Also the Moto X does things like customize button colors and the camera ring color and that sort of thing, so there's a lot more customization options. And the interesting thing here is you can see that the Moto G isn't too much smaller in size to the Moto X. This is a 4.7-inch screen versus the Moto G's 4.5-inch screen. So that's a quick look at the Moto G. Let's take a quick look at our accessories, and as you can see, this is a budget phone and there is not a whole lot in here. So we basically have a standard micro USB charging cable, no power adapter, so you can supply your own or just use your computer to charge your phone, and we have some basic paperwork in here. So we have our guide for removing the back panel. Moto G, let's get started. Quick guide shows you how to operate some of the features here. And then we have it in different languages and the basic safety and warranty guide. All right, so let's go ahead and peel the front plastic off. And I actually can't get my fingernail under this little tab here, so I have to use a razor blade. There we go. All right, so that is the Moto G. Let's set that aside for just a moment while we take a look at the Google Play version. So you can see the packaging is pretty much identical. We're going to slice this tab here, lift up, and there we go. Same packaging as well. Motorola, a Google company. Let's tip this over. So there we go. We have the same design black back panel with that matte finish. And again, you can swap these back panels out. So if we take a look at the accessories, we have the same micro USB charging cable, and that's about it. Our pamphlet should be a little bit different here, so let's take a look. So again, we have that pamphlet for removing the back panel. Moto G, let's get started. So this is a little different here. So you can see they've updated some of the pictures and that sort of thing for the stock Android experience. And we have it in different languages and the same safety and warranty guide information. All right, so let's go ahead and peel this plastic off, and it's the same story here. I can't quite get my fingernail under that. All right, so let's take a tour around the hardware, and as you can see, I can't really tell the difference between the two of them right now, and that's because externally they are identical, as well as internally. They have the same specs. The only difference is the software. So let's just grab one of them. It doesn't matter here. So we have a 5 megapixel autofocusing camera, which can record video at 720p at 30 frames per second, so you do not have 1080p in this case. We have our loudspeaker right next to it, an LED flash. We have that Motorola dimple, which we're familiar with from the Moto X. On the side, you have these metallic buttons. I'm not sure if they're plastic or metal, but they feel pretty nice, very similar to the Moto X. Up top, you have your headphone jack along with a noise cancellation microphone. Now toward the top, we'll find a 1.3 megapixel front-facing camera, good for 720p video. We also have a notification LED light right next to the earpiece. We also have hidden in there a proximity sensor as well as an ambient light sensor. Now toward the bottom, you'll find another microphone. This is your mouthpiece as well as the micro USB charging port, and this also acts as your thumbnail port for popping off the back panel. So let's go ahead and do that so you can take a look to see what's under there. Just pop this off. There you go. So you have a kind of flimsy back panel, which is rigid, of course. Once it's connected to the phone, you won't find any NFC antennas in here because this phone is not equipped with it. So we have this non-removable battery pack. In fact, they do warn you not to remove this, so don't try and pry this out of here. And along the other side, you'll find your micro SIM tray. So all you have to do, not SIM tray, but SIM slot, all you have to do is insert your SIM right there. Pretty simple. As you can see, you have your camera module, which is right next to the speaker grill, right there. And to reinstall the panel, pretty simple, just snap it into place. Goes on pretty securely. All right, so let's go ahead and boot these phones up at the same time. As you can see, they do have different boot animations. So we have that standard Motorola animation, which actually changes with the seasons. Sometimes you have a holiday theme. I think this time we have sort of a summer theme. Now, before I talk about the Google Play Edition, I just want to talk about how the Moto G differs from the Moto X. Now, the Moto X was pretty much a stock Android device with a few Motorola features added in. It was very close to stock anyway, and has some very useful features which the Moto G lacks. Now, one of them is this quick glance feature for your notification system. So all you have to do is pick up your phone, it flashes your notifications on the screen, and you can quickly take a look at them. So for example, if I tap and hold it, it gives me my notifications, and I can unlock it or address that notification. So that's one of my favorite features of the Moto X. Unfortunately, the Moto G doesn't do it, and it makes sense because the Moto G has an LCD screen, and if it did this, it would drain the battery pretty quickly. Another feature the Moto G lacks is the quick capture feature, which basically allows you to twist your wrist to activate the camera really quickly, so you don't have to unlock your device at all. It just launches your camera. Another very useful feature. Now, this also lacks the ability to command Google Now from a locked state. Or at least the Moto G does. So for example, with the Moto X, I can say, "Okay, Google Now, what's the weather like tomorrow?"
Tomorrow's forecast for Rochester is 25 degrees with a chance of snow showers.
Now, in terms of the user interface, you can see they're pretty much identical. We have the same app drawer. We do have some different apps, and I'll explore that in just a minute. We have of course, we have the recent apps launcher, which again is also identical. You can swipe them out of the way to close them or launch them. If you go to home, it takes you to the home button. You have your back button. If you go to your drop-down shade, you have your quick access toggles for your quick settings. And as you can see, they're pretty much identical. And your notification shade is also almost identical. Now, if we go to the settings, we can take a look at the version of Android we're running, and we should be running the same thing. If we look at our settings panel, you can see that they're pretty much identical. You do see Motorola Privacy and Motorola Device ID, which are Motorola features. If we go to About Phone, you'll see Android 4.4.2 with our KitKat logo. Now, in terms of apps, both devices have the same suite of Google apps. So we have the complete suite of Google apps on both of them. The only thing the Moto G offers is the FM radio, which is kind of nice. So all you have to do is connect a set of headphones to access the FM radio. There's a few other things here, such as Motorola Assist, which I went over in more detail in my Moto X review. But basically, it's a contextually aware app that changes the device's behavior depending on what you're doing. So for example, if you're sleeping, you can configure this for sleeping mode. Basically, it turns off notifications for certain times of day. You can also change exactly how that behaves, whether you want to receive calls from certain people or if somebody calls twice. You also have meeting mode and that sort of thing. Now, what I don't see here is driving mode for the Moto G, so I'm not sure if that's missing entirely or I have to enable something, but driving mode is something that's available on the Moto X, and basically it's GPS aware, so if you're driving it knows it and it changes the device's behavior for reading out texts and that sort of thing. Now in terms of other apps we have here, we have Motorola Migrate, which allows you to migrate from one device to another, so you can migrate your content from another Android device to this pretty easily. Now the Moto G also includes this Translate app, which is a Google app, and that's just not included here, but you can download that separately. So you can translate spoken word, written word, or images of text, and it will translate it for you. So for example, let's go to German because I know German. So you can change your languages here. So I can go from English to German, and I can speak it. Where do you live?
Wo leben Sie?
Now I can quickly switch between languages so the other person can speak to you. So you can say, Wie alt bist du?
How old are you?
You can also write here. So somebody could, in theory, write for you and basically translate the text to German. So hello is hello in German. Now the Google Play Edition is using Hangouts while we have a dedicated SMS app for the Motorola phone. Now in terms of our camera app, this is also where things really differ here. So we have the standard Android camera app, which is pretty familiar territory here. So we have our still mode, so we can tap anywhere on the scene to focus. You can also pinch in and out to zoom in. You can snap your photo. I'm not going to get into too much detail here. You have your settings for changing your settings. You can also tap and hold anywhere on the screen to get to your settings. There you go. And you can also drill down. And you can switch between your video mode or your panorama mode. What you're not seeing here is photosphere mode, so it looks like this phone is not capable of that mode for whatever reason. Maybe it doesn't have the processing hardware or sensors to do it. Now the camera app on the Motorola version is quite a bit different, so you can tap anywhere on the scene, it automatically takes the photo, and if you want to tap to focus, you actually have to go to your settings. In order to get to your settings, you swipe from anywhere on the left side of the screen. So this gives you this little control wheel for getting to settings. So the first one you see here is control focus and exposure, which you can turn on. So when I do that, I now get this little box here which I can move around to focus on my scene, and now I can tap anywhere on the scene and it takes the photo. So you can see a lot of people don't like that. I don't like that. It tends to be a little obnoxious because it's a layer of settings I have to get through to get to a commonly used feature. So I prefer not to have that. So I usually keep it off. You also can change your flash mode. You can enable HDR. You have slow-mo mode, and you also have panorama. Again, no photosphere mode. And as you can see, they light up in the cyan color when they're active. You also have geolocation. You can change the aspect ratio of your image, and you also have audio, so you can turn off your audio sounds. So as you can see, lots of features here from that control panel. Now in order to start recording video, you don't go to a video mode, you just hit this recording icon up here and it starts recording video for you. And you can pinch in and out while you're shooting video as well. And when you're shooting video, you can tap anywhere on the scene to take a photo. And if you swipe in from the left, you can see that the control panel does turn off while you're recording video. Now in terms of this display, I'm really impressed here. Again, this is an LCD IPS display, has excellent contrast ratio. So if you look at the black areas of the screen, you can see even with the Android control bar here, you can see it almost disappears into the black bezel of the phone. And this is with the screen at maximum brightness. If you look at the white areas of the phone, you can see it's a pretty clean, bright white color. Looks really sharp. If you look at the text, you can see just how pin sharp it is, even at the highest resolution here. So you can see we're looking at the full The Verge website, and even the smallest text is pin sharp. This has a very similar pixel density to the iPhone, so 326 or 329 pixels per inch, depending on what spec sheet you're looking at. Again, very similar to the iPhone, so it looks really good. Now in terms of performance, KitKat 4.4 runs great on low-end hardware, and because it's not a skin version of Android, it's pretty clean and simple, so there is not a lot of resource demands on the hardware here. So even though we have low-end hardware, this version of Android is really clean and simple, and that actually goes not just for the Google Play Edition, but that's also true of the standard Motorola Edition, because it doesn't have a lot of software features built into the skin they've placed on here. There's basically no skin, so it runs just as well as the Google Play Edition. So I have no complaints here. I'm definitely impressed overall by the performance of both phones. Now, in terms of performance, you can see the Moto G is pretty low here. So it scored only 338 on the single core score. Again, this is a 1.2 gigahertz quad core processor, so that's pretty low. You can see the multi-core score is not too far from the multi-core score on the Moto X, which in itself doesn't do too well compared to something like the Nexus 5 and, of course, the iPhone 5S. So these are much better performing devices overall. The Moto G is definitely on the low end. Alright, so let's go ahead and do a size comparison between the Moto G and popular phones like the iPhone 5S. Now, the interesting thing with the iPhone 5S here is, although it has a smaller screen, 4 inches versus 4.5 inches, you can see that the Google Play Edition in particular actually uses part of that screen for the Android control. So it almost looks like the screen is about the same size or even smaller than the iPhone screen. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the iPhone is much more compact, much lighter weight, much thinner. So if we compare them side by side, you can see just how much thinner that iPhone is by comparison. But of course, off contract, this iPhone, 64 gigs, costed about $900. This off contract costs less than $200. So keep that in mind. And of course, we also have the superb Nexus 5, which I really like as well. So you can see it's quite a bit larger, gives you a much larger screen. We have our GS4 Google Play Edition, again, larger, similar in size to the Nexus 5. We have our HTC One, beautiful hardware, smaller screen, 4.7 inches, still bigger than the Moto G. But as you can see, they're both LCD IPS displays. This is 1080p versus 720p. And then we have the Moto X, one of my favorite Android phones of 2013 because of those features, which unfortunately the Moto G loses. So there you go. That's the Moto X, and that is 4.7 inches with a 720p display. And then we have the obscenely large Z Ultra, which I also reviewed. As you can see, it's more tablet than phone at this point. So in conclusion, the Moto G is a superb value. There is no denying that fact. You get a beautiful display and you get stock Android. You get the latest version of Android when most phones this cheap are usually running really bad hardware with old versions of Android. So really there isn't a lot of phones like this out there. This is one of a kind. Now generally speaking, I find it pretty difficult to recommend one over the other. They're very similar. There's not a huge difference in terms of their feature set and the user experience. So really I think it's up to you and the availability of these devices. Now ultimately I would prefer the Google Play Edition just because it is absolutely clean Android and that's something I value. So that would be the version I would get. And because I'm an AT&T customer, I don't have to worry about the band restrictions. So that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again in the next one. Alright guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, testing out the front-facing camera on the Moto G. Again, this is 720p video, so unfortunately no 1080p video here, but gives you an idea of the microphone performance as well as that front-facing camera, so it's pretty standard stuff, nothing remarkable. Alright, so this is Chloe, this is Zoe. Of course, we got to get them in a Detroit Borg video. So this is the main camera. This is the rear firing camera, not frying camera. This is a 5 megapixel camera with 720p video. Again, no 1080p even on the main camera, which may be a restriction to the processing power of this device. So I can pinch in and out. As you can see, it's this digital zoom. It doesn't do a very good job there, but it does a pretty decent job. Again, a fairly standard camera for a phone that's running on hardware that's maybe 2 years old. So there you go, Zoe and Chloe.